Jax's revenge domain. The radio crackled and Jordan's voice cut through the diesel noise like a knife. He'd just fired me for refusing to dig us all into an early grave, and he thought signing the paychecks gave him the right to play God with our lives. He was wrong. I was sitting 8 feet down in a Caterpillar 345 holding enough hydraulic power to move mountains, and I was about to show this college boy exactly what 26 years of dirt and common sense could do to his pretty little world. My name's Gary Harrison, but everyone on the site calls me Bull. I'm 49 years old, and I've been running heavy machinery since before Jordan Stevens learned to tie his shoes. That Tuesday morning started like any other at the Blue Ridge Dam project. Coffee in my thermos, safety check on the cat, and the usual pre-shift meeting where Jordan liked to remind us all how much smarter he was than everybody else. The Blue Ridge project was a big deal, maybe the biggest dam construction in Virginia in 20 years. We were building a concrete arch dam, 180 feet high, designed to hold back millions of gallons of mountain water. The foundation work was critical. You mess up the spillway excavation and the whole structure could fail. That's the kind of failure that doesn't just cost money, it kills people. I'd been running the primary excavator for 18 months, working my way through different soil layers according to the geological surveys. The engineers had mapped out 3 distinct zones: stable granite bedrock at the bottom, then a layer of compressed shale, then loose fill dirt on top. Each layer had different load-bearing characteristics, different water absorption rates, different risks. Jordan had been pushing us harder every week since he took over as project engineer 3 months earlier. See, he was married to Director Wagner's daughter, which meant he could do pretty much whatever he wanted. What he wanted was to finish this job 3 months early and make himself look like some kind of hero. The rest of us just wanted to go home with all our parts attached. That morning, Jordan showed up at my excavator waving a new set of plans. The kid was 26 years old, fresh out of Virginia Tech with an engineering degree and an attitude. He wore a hard hat that looked like it came out of a gift shop and safety boots that had never seen real mud. "Gary, we're changing the dig schedule," he said, not even looking up from his tablet. "I need you to go down another 4 feet past the red markers today." I shut off the engine and climbed down from the cab. The morning air was crisp, with that mountain smell of pine and cold water. Down in the excavation site, I could see the crew setting up for the concrete pour, guys I'd worked with for years, good men with families. "Jordan, those markers are there for a reason. Soil compression reports say we hit unstable shale at that depth. The geologist specifically flagged that zone as high risk for cave-ins." He finally looked at me, and I could see that smug expression he got whenever someone questioned his engineering degree. "Gary, I appreciate your experience, but I've run the calculations. The university taught me new computational methods for soil analysis that you wouldn't understand. We can handle the risk." "What risk?" I pointed to the crew working 20 feet below us, setting rebar for the concrete pour. "You talking about risking those guys getting buried when the walls come down?" Jordan's face got red. "I'm talking about risking this project going over budget and over schedule. Corporate is breathing down my neck about quarterly numbers. We dig deeper today, or we're all going to have bigger problems than a little loose dirt." I'd been in construction long enough to know the difference between tight deadlines and suicide missions. Back in '98, I'd seen a trench collapse in Richmond that buried 2 guys. Took the fire department 4 hours to dig them out. One of them, Tommy Rodriguez, still walks with a limp and can't use his right arm properly. All because some supervisor decided schedule was more important than safety protocols. "Jordan, I've got 26 years running equipment. I'm not digging past those markers without a new geological survey and proper shoring. OSHA regulations say the operator has final authority on hazardous conditions." That's when Jordan's voice got that cold, dangerous tone that supervisors use when they think they own you. "Gary, you're refusing a direct order from your supervisor. That's insubordination. That's safety," I shot back. "And that's final." Jordan pulled out his phone and started typing, his thumbs flying over the screen. "We'll see about that. Report to the project trailer in 10 minutes. And Gary, leave your hard hat. You're done." Walking to that trailer, I knew I was walking into an ambush. Jordan had been looking for an excuse to get rid of me since he started the job. I was the only operator with enough experience to challenge his engineering decisions, and that made me a problem he wanted to eliminate. The project trailer was one of those prefab things they set up on every big job, filled with blueprints that cost more than my truck and coffee that tasted like motor oil. Jordan was sitting behind the desk like he was judge and jury, with Maria Santos from Safety Compliance standing off to the side looking uncomfortable. Maria was good people, a 15-year veteran who actually cared about keeping workers alive. She'd been documenting safety violations for months, but Jordan had been burying her reports in paperwork. "Gary," Jordan started, reading from a prepared statement, "after careful consideration, I'm terminating your employment for safety violations and suspected substance abuse." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. Substance abuse? "Jordan, I haven't touched a drop since my brother Jack's wedding 3 years ago." "Your behavior this morning was erratic," Jordan continued, his voice getting more confident as he read from his script. "Slurred speech, refusal to follow direct orders, argumentative attitude. I'm documenting this as impairment on duty and reporting it to the state licensing board." Maria Santos cleared her throat. "Mr. Stevens, I've been observing the morning shift. I haven't witnessed any signs of impairment in Mr. Harrison's behavior or speech patterns." "Your opinion wasn't requested, Maria," Jordan snapped. "This is a personnel matter outside your jurisdiction. I stood there watching this 26-year-old kid destroy everything I'd built over 3 decades. My operator's license, my reputation, my ability to feed my wife Sarah and keep our little house in the mountains. All because I wouldn't help him bury some good men under a pile of rocks." "Jordan," I said, keeping my voice level, "you're making a serious mistake here." "I don't think so, Gary. I think I'm solving a personnel problem that should have been addressed months ago." He signed the termination papers with a flourish. "Security will escort you off the property. Clean out your toolbox and turn in your safety gear." I looked at Maria, who was shaking her head slightly. She knew this was garbage, but Jordan was her supervisor too. Speaking up too loud would just get her fired next. Roy Martinez from security showed up 5 minutes later. Roy was good people, a former electrician who'd moved to security after his back went bad. He'd been around construction sites long enough to know the difference between safety consciousness and troublemaking. "Sorry about this, Gary," Roy said quietly as we walked toward my truck. "This whole thing stinks." "Thanks, Roy. Do me a favor. Keep an eye on that excavation site. Something bad is going to happen if Jordan keeps pushing those depth limits." Roy nodded. "I'll watch it. You take care of yourself." I drove my F-150 down the mountain road feeling like I'd been gut shot. 26 years of perfect safety records, 0 accidents, 0 violations, and now I was facing a state investigation that could strip my license permanently. The lies Jordan had put in his report would follow me to every job site in Virginia. But driving past the overlook where you could see the whole project spread out below, something shifted in my thinking. Jordan thought he'd won because he had the paperwork and the family connections. What he didn't understand was that I knew things about that construction site that his engineering degree never taught him. I pulled into the overlook and called my brother Jack. He'd been a labor attorney for 30 years before he retired, and he still had contacts throughout the state regulatory system. More importantly, Jack understood how the game was really played. "Gary, what's wrong?" Jack's voice was sharp. He could read trouble in my tone. "Jordan Stevens just fired me for refusing to violate safety protocols. Then he filed a false report claiming I was drunk on the job." Jack was quiet for a long moment. "That's serious, Gary. If the state licensing board takes his report, seriously, you're looking at a mandatory suspension and treatment program. Even if you prove you're clean, the investigation alone could take 6 months." "I know. But Jack, there's something else going on here. I've been watching the materials deliveries and the numbers don't add up." "What do you mean?" "Jordan signs off on deliveries that don't match what actually shows up on site. Last week we were supposed to get 200 tons of high-grade concrete mix for the spillway foundation, but I watched them unload maybe 80 tons of standard mix. The invoices all show premium materials, but that's not what's going into the dam." Jack's voice got very serious. "Gary, that's fraud. If Jordan is falsifying delivery reports and skimming materials for resale, that's federal prison time. Can you prove it?" "I think so. He keeps all his files in that project trailer. Purchase orders, delivery receipts, quality control reports. If someone could get a look at those files..." "Gary, I know what you're thinking, and it's dangerous. You can't break into that trailer." "I'm not talking about breaking in, Jack. I'm talking about an industrial accident that might expose some paperwork." There was a long silence on the line. "What kind of accident?" "The kind that happens when you're dealing with high-pressure water systems and somebody makes a mistake with an excavator bucket." Jack sighed. "Gary, whatever you're planning, you need to be very careful, and you need to make sure someone official is ready to document whatever gets exposed. Can you call Maria Santos and tell her to keep detailed records of everything that happens this afternoon? Tell her it might be important for a future investigation." "I can do that." "And Gary, I'm also calling Scott Williams at the county sheriff's office. He needs to know there might be evidence of federal crimes that could surface today. Thanks, Jack. I owe you. You don't owe me anything. Just don't get yourself killed proving a point. I hung up and sat there for a few minutes, looking down at the construction site. Jordan was probably celebrating right now, thinking he'd eliminated his biggest problem. What he didn't realize was that he'd just created a much bigger problem for himself. The thing about construction sites is they're built around controlled systems: electrical, water, communications, drainage. When you've been running heavy equipment as long as I have, you learn how all those systems connect. You know which pipes carry what, where the main shutoffs are located, and exactly how much pressure different lines can handle. The Blue Ridge project had a main water feed running from the mountain spring down to the site. It was a 24-inch steel pipe carrying water at 120 psi to supply the concrete mixing plant, the equipment washing stations, and the administrative buildings. The engineers had routed it underground for safety, but I'd watched the installation crew lay that pipe 8 months ago. I knew exactly where it ran. More importantly, I knew it ran right under Jordan's precious project trailer, where he kept all his files and met with his materials suppliers who'd been giving him such generous pricing on concrete that somehow never made it to the job. I started the truck and headed back toward the site. Time to show Jordan Stevens what happens when you mess with a man who's got nothing left to lose. Getting back onto the construction site turned out to be easier than I expected. The afternoon shift was starting, and in all the activity of workers changing over, equipment moving around, and deliveries coming in, nobody paid attention to one more pickup truck. I parked behind the equipment shed where my F-150 wouldn't stand out among all the other work vehicles. The site was busy with normal afternoon operations. Jordan was down in the excavation pit with a surveyor, probably trying to figure out how to dig deeper without triggering a cave-in. The concrete crew was preparing for their pour, setting up forms and checking rebar placement. Everyone was focused on their work, trusting that the people above them knew what they were doing. I walked over to my Caterpillar 345 like I belonged there. After 18 months on this job, that machine felt more like home than my actual house. I knew every control, every gauge, every quirk in the hydraulic system. The Cat was a 45-ton beast designed for precision excavation work, powerful enough to move massive amounts of earth, but delicate enough to work within inches of underground utilities. I ran through my standard startup checklist: engine oil, hydraulic fluid, track tension, bucket positioning. Everything checked out perfect. The morning shift operator had left the machine in good condition, ready for the next job. What he didn't know was that the next job wasn't going to be routine excavation. From the operator's seat 8 feet up, I had a clear view of the entire construction site. I could see Jordan down in the pit still arguing with the surveyor about soil stability. The guy was pointing at his instruments, shaking his head, probably trying to explain why going deeper was a bad idea. Jordan was waving his tablet around, showing off his computer calculations. But what I was really looking at was the project trailer where Jordan kept all his files. It was a standard construction office, 40 feet long, 12 feet wide, sitting on concrete blocks about 200 feet from the excavation site. I knew that underneath that trailer, maybe 6 feet down, ran the main water line that supplied the entire project. That pipe had been installed according to the original site plans, back when we thought the trailer would be temporary. But as the project grew, Jordan had expanded his office, added equipment, turned it into the nerve center for all his operations. What he didn't realize was that he'd built his empire directly over the site's most vulnerable choke point. I fired up the Cat and started moving toward the far end of the excavation area. Jordan looked up from the pit and pointed at me, probably wondering what I was doing back on site. He started climbing out of the pit, moving faster when he realized it was me behind the controls. The great thing about operating heavy machinery is that once you're in motion, people tend to get out of your way. A 45-ton excavator doesn't stop quickly, and smart workers respect the physics involved. Jordan was waving his arms and shouting something I couldn't hear over the engine noise, but he wasn't about to stand in front of a moving Cat to make his point. I positioned the machine about 30 feet from the trailer and extended the boom. The bucket controls on a 345 are hydraulic and precise. You can pick up a quarter with the bucket if you know what you're doing. What I was doing required a different kind of precision. I needed to hit a 24-inch pipe that was buried 6 feet underground in exactly the right spot to cause maximum chaos. The soil here was mostly sandy, fill over the original bedrock, easy digging, but loose enough that water would spread quickly once it broke through. I lowered the bucket and started a careful excavation, working my way down in 2-foot layers. Jordan finally made it over to the excavator, screaming and waving his hard hat. I could see his mouth moving but couldn't hear the words. I opened the operator's door and leaned out. "What?" I shouted over the engine noise. "What are you doing here? You're fired! You're trespassing!" "Forgot my lunchbox," I called back. "Thought it might be buried over here somewhere." Jordan's face went purple. "Shut down that machine right now. I'm calling security." I gave him a thumbs up and closed the door. Security was Roy Martinez, and Roy was probably in his trailer filling out paperwork. By the time Jordan found him and explained the situation, I'd be long done with my lunchbox search. I went back to digging, 4 feet down, 5 feet, 6 feet. The bucket scraped against something, hard and metallic. There it was, the main water line, exactly where the installation crew had buried it 8 months ago. A 24-inch steel pipe carrying mountain spring water at 120 PSY to every building on the site. Jordan was running toward the trailer now, probably to call for backup, but he was too late, and he was running in exactly the wrong direction. I adjusted the bucket angle for maximum impact and brought it down hard. The explosion was everything I'd hoped for, and more. 120 PS. That doesn't sound like much until you understand the physics. That's 120 pounds of pressure on every square inch of pipe surface. When you breach a 24-inch line carrying that kind of pressure, you don't get a leak. You get a geyser that shoots water 40 feet into the air before gravity brings it back down like a mountain thunderstorm. The sound was incredible, a massive whoosh followed by the roar of tons of water hitting the ground. Jordan tried to change direction, but he was standing in a shallow depression that immediately turned into a lake. The water spread out in all directions, following the natural drainage patterns toward the lower ground where his trailer sat. I shut off the excavator and climbed down to watch nature take its course. Water doesn't negotiate or take orders from project engineers. It follows the laws of physics, period. And physics said all that pressurized water was going to flow downhill toward Jordan's office, carrying with it 8 months' worth of construction site mud, loose gravel, and anything else that wasn't nailed down. The trailer held out for maybe 30 seconds before the water found its way under the door. When pressurized water hits electrical systems, interesting things happen fast. I heard the first transformer blow about 2 minutes after the flood reached the trailer. Then the emergency lighting kicked in. Then that went out too. Jordan was standing knee-deep in muddy water, screaming at anyone who'd listen, but most of the crew was busy, trying to shut off the main water valve. That's when the filing cabinets started floating. Jordan kept everything in old-style metal filing cabinets because he didn't trust digital storage. Smart policy for most things, but not so smart when your office turns into a swimming pool. I watched through the trailer windows as boxes of paperwork came floating up like cork, bumping against the ceiling, splitting open and spilling documents everywhere. Jordan saw it too. He waded through the water toward the trailer door, probably trying to salvage his files, but the current was too strong. Water was still shooting out of that broken pipe at full pressure, and gravity was doing the rest. By the time he reached the door, there were invoices and purchase orders floating everywhere. That's when Scott Williams showed up. Scott's a county sheriff's deputy who works industrial accidents. He's been around construction sites long enough to know the difference between bad luck and suspicious timing. He pulled up in his cruiser just as Jordan was trying to wade into the flooded trailer. "Nobody goes in there until we shut off the water," Scott announced. He was wearing those tall rubber boots that cops keep for flood situations. "Sites closed pending investigation." "Investigation?" Jordan sputtered. "This was sabotage. Gary Harrison did this deliberately." Scott looked over at me. I was sitting on a concrete barrier, watching the show like any other worker who'd stopped to see what the commotion was about. "That true, Gary? You sabotaged this water line?" "Scott, I was looking for my lunchbox," I said. Hydraulic control slipped on the excavator. These old machines can be unpredictable. Jordan pointed at the broken pipe. He knew exactly where that line was. This was revenge for firing him. "Maybe," Scott said, "or maybe it was an equipment malfunction." He pulled out his radio. "Maria, you there? I need you at the main site. We got a situation." Maria Santos showed up 10 minutes later carrying her clipboard and camera. She'd been documenting safety issues for months, and this was probably the biggest one yet. She took photos of the broken pipe, the flooded area, and the chaos of paperwork floating around the trailer. "Officer Williams," she said, pointing at the documents scattered in the water, These look like official project files, purchase orders, delivery receipts. If they're damaged, we might lose important project records. Better collect them then, Scott said. He looked at Jordan. You got a problem with us preserving evidence of this accident? Jordan looked like he wanted to say yes, but he was stuck. Refusing to let them collect official project documents would look suspicious. Fine, but I want everything returned to me personally. Maria started gathering up the soggy paperwork. That's when she found the first discrepancy. Officer Williams, this delivery receipt doesn't match our inventory records, she said, holding up a waterlogged invoice. This shows 200 tons of premium concrete mix delivered last week, but our site inventory only shows 80 tons of standard mix. Scott took the paper and studied it. Where's the other 120 tons? Jordan went pale. There must be an error in the paperwork. Error? Maria was reading more documents. Here's another one. Delivery of 50 tons of high-grade rebar, but I only see 20 tons in our materials storage. That's when Jessica Parker showed up. Jessica's an assistant district attorney who specializes in construction fraud. My brother Jack must have called in some serious favors to get her here this fast. She was wearing a business suit and rain boots, carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than Jordan's car payment. Officer Williams, I'm ADA Parker. I understand you've uncovered possible evidence of materials fraud. Scott handed her the waterlogged documents. Looks like someone's been ordering premium materials and receiving standard grade, but charging the project for premium prices. Jessica started reading through the invoices, her expression getting grimmer with each page. Mr. Stevens, these purchase orders have your signature. Can you explain the discrepancies between what was ordered and what was delivered? Jordan looked like a trapped animal. Those documents are damaged, water damaged. They can't be reliable evidence. Actually, Maria said, pulling out a plastic bag, I found these in a waterproof filing cabinet that stayed sealed. She handed over a stack of dry documents. Correspondence with Hartwell Construction about materials deliveries. Looks like Mr. Stevens was selling our premium materials to competitors and substituting cheaper alternatives. Jessica examined the papers. Mr. Stevens, these emails show you arranging the sale of materials purchased for this project to outside contractors. That's theft of government property. You can't prove anything, Jordan said, but his voice was shaking. Actually, we can, Jessica replied. These documents show a systematic pattern of fraud going back 8 months. Estimated value over $800,000. Scott put the handcuffs on Jordan about 20 minutes later. Turns out when you steal materials from a federal dam project and sell them to competitors, that's multiple felonies. The DA's office had enough evidence from the soggy paperwork to charge him with theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Jordan's wife divorced him before the trial started. Director Wagner resigned in disgrace. The whole contracting company got investigated, and they found similar schemes on 3 other projects. The company offered me Jordan's job, but I turned it down. At 49, I'm too old to start pushing papers around a desk. But I did accept the promotion to senior operator with safety oversight authority. Now, when some college graduate wants to do something dangerous, they have to convince me first. I still run the CAT 345, but I also train the younger guys coming up. I teach them about soil compression and hydraulic systems, but mostly I teach them that experience counts for something. That safety isn't just rules in a manual, it's about making sure everyone goes home to their families. My advice? Do your job well, but don't let anyone pressure you into compromising your principles. Keep your own records, trust your experience over someone else's computer calculations, and remember that every piece of heavy equipment gives you more power than any supervisor has in his office. And always know where the water lines run. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying your enemy, it's letting them destroy themselves while you hold the keys to their downfall. In the end, a man's reputation is built on decades of solid work, but it only takes one moment of choosing principles over paychecks to define who he really is.